Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2013 Sustainability Leaders Series, brought to you by the Yale Center for Business and the Environment. Happy Friday to everyone, and hopefully we don't have another snow-filled weekend here in New Haven, Connecticut, like we've had recently. As I said, this talk is brought to you by the Yale Center for Business and the Environment in partnership with the GE Foundation, and will be broadcast simultaneously through the Yale's YouTube channel. The Sustainability Leaders Series brings thought leaders to campus to speak and engage with students and faculty about the challenges and opportunities of implementing sustainability within their respective organizations. Welcome to those of you both in the audience here and online. Today we are quite pleased to host a presentation and panel discussion entitled Geotechnology and the Future of Sustainability. This is the culmination of a two-day conference here at Yale organized by the Yale Climate and Energy Institute, which from what I'm hearing has been just a fantastic experience for everyone involved. This discussion will feature Rebecca Moore, Engineering Manager at Google Earth Outreach and Earth Engine, and three of Yale's finest, Professor Karen Seto, Professor Walter Jetz, and Professor Dana Tomlin. I'm going to introduce Rebecca and then provide a little bit of detail about the format for today's discussion, and then we'll get started. So Rebecca Moore is a computer scientist and a longtime software professional. At Google, she conceived and leads the Google Earth Outreach program, which supports nonprofits, communities, and indigenous peoples around the world in applying Google's mapping tools to the world's pressing problems in areas such as environmental conservation, human rights, and cultural preservation. Rebecca has also initiated and leads the development of Google Earth Engine, a new technology platform which supports global-scale monitoring and protection of the Earth's environment. Rebecca received a bachelor's degree with honors from Brown University in artificial intelligence with a master's degree from Stanford University. Her personal work using Google Earth was instrumental in stopping the logging of more than 1,000 acres of redwoods in her Santa Cruz mountain community. The format for this discussion is going to be, I'm going to invite Rebecca up. She's going to speak for a period of time. Then each of our own experts from Yale is going to give brief presentations. We'll have a discussion between the entire panel, and then we'll open it up for Q&A to the audience. So please join me in welcoming Rebecca to Yale.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Yale Center of Environment for hosting our Google team. It's been a really fantastic 2 days. Yale is the first university with whom we have done an intensive 2-day on-campus workshop. There's amazing environmental science going on here. It's a great honor. So when we talk about geotechnology, there's kind of an experiment going on right now that started back in 2005 when Google Earth and Google Maps first came out. And it's, what happens when you put in the hands of the world the most realistic, accurate, comprehensive replica of the planet that has ever existed before. We have more than 20 million petabytes of satellite imagery in Google Earth. I mean, it's billions of megabytes of satellite imagery. We have almost 100 million kilometers of road data. We have 3D terrain, and we give that to people in this very easy to navigate experience. So when Google Earth first came out, most people were kind of like, okay, I can look at my home, I can spy in my neighbor's backyard from space, maybe figure out where to go backpacking, but what else can I do? And it turns out that there are amazing applications of Google Earth to many issues of sustainability. And so I thought what I would do is take you on a little bit of a guided tour of some of the things people have done first with Google Earth. And actually, before I do that, one way I think about it is we're entering this new era of Geo Literacy. Right? More than 1 billion people using Google Earth, more than 1 billion people using Google Maps. Part of our motto is seeing is believing, making the invisible visible. Show people, don't tell people. Some of the issues that I've encountered actually personally as an environmentalist are that there are fundamental disagreements about the basic facts of an environmental situation on the ground. So if you can eliminate those discrepancies in understanding, you can sometimes make more progress. So here we are, Croon Hall. But let's try going somewhere interesting. So when I mentioned when Google Earth Somewhere not Croon Hall? Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to be insulting. But yeah, when Google Earth first came out, we're getting all this imagery every day. One of the common questions people ask us is, how often do you update your imagery? And the answer is, well, it depends where, because we're updating it somewhere almost, every day. But we're not looking at the imagery. But it turns out lots of other people are looking at the imagery. And when we publish new imagery, people look at it. So one interesting thing happened. People are making fundamental discoveries about the natural world using the virtual world of Google Earth. So this is a... oh yeah, lights down would be great. Thank you for that suggestion. This right here is a fringing coral reef off the coast of Western Australia that was actually discovered using Google Earth. It was discovered by an environmental scientist working in Western Australia. He said when he did that, can you see that better? He said, hang on, I'm driving a little slowly here. He said he felt like a bloody desktop Darwin, right? Being able to make this discovery using Google Earth. But it wasn't just sort of charming. It turned out that that area was about to be subjected to an oil and gas permitting process and exploration. And that area was very remote. There are no roads there. People were not aware of that delicate, rare type of coral reef. So that discovery, that virtual discovery, actually made a difference in terms of stopping that process. Back closer to home, the group Appalachian Voices was trying to raise awareness of the more than 400 mountains that have been blown up in West Virginia, Kentucky, and so on to produce electricity. It's a very difficult problem to understand without looking at it on the ground, and or without seeing it from the air, and you're not allowed to go on the ground to visit these places. They asked if we could help them create a virtual guided tour of some of these blown up mountains. So this, for example, is one. A former mountain, almost 800 vertical feet removed. And by looking at this, you can actually start to tell a story. This is a sludge pond that is being held back by an earthen dam. And at the base of that dam is an elementary school. These dams are known to fail. So they've used this tool to raise awareness in the halls of Congress about the environmental and the public health implications of these kind of situations. Let's take you to one more place here. See if this will work. This is another mine site.
It's the environmental rate, that's all you call it. They've just destroyed our way of life completely. Everything.
I'm going to stop that, but they were trying to raise awareness and get signatures on a petition, and within, I think it was 10 days of posting this, they had more than 13,000 signatures from every state in the US. They also they did a very innovative Google Maps application because they wanted to connect people to their personal use of mountaintop removal coal. And does anyone know the zip code here? 06511. So you go to this site, and many people think unless they live in Appalachia, they're not connected to mountaintop removal. Connecticut Light and Power, does that sound good?
UI as well.
Oh, is that right? Okay, so we can redo that, but just for the sake of argument. What they do is they reach into a database of the power suppliers and where that electricity is going, and you literally can find out here what mountains were blown up in West Virginia when you turn on your light switch. Thank you. So that is interesting in terms of connecting people to their personal impact. A Yale professor, one of the other things we're finding is often local communities, indigenous communities, rural communities in the developing world, they know a lot about what's happening on the ground in certain places where, for example, animals are being poached, where illegal logging is happening. But many of the scientists and nonprofits we've talked to say, when we try to show them a 2D map and we say, show us where these things are happening, they can't make that mental connection from the real world to that 2D map. But when you show them Google Earth, they say, oh, this is where the elephants go in the spring. This is where they're getting poached. Here's where the illegal traps are. Here's a project that Yale is doing. This is an example. I think the image is getting cut off, of working with a local community in South America. I think it's Professor Rob Bayless. I'm not sure if he's here. But this is, let's go to this part of the planet. They actually let's go in here. Yeah. They wanted to get a sense of the fuel wood extraction, or where people in the local community were going to take fuel wood. So with people's permission, they wore satellite tags, and their tracks were captured. Here, you can see this. And this is helping. Can you see these different colored tracks? Hardly? Let me zoom in a little closer here. The idea is to get a better understanding of how far people are going to collect fuel wood. You see this? Is it coming out there? Yeah. So these are kind of innovative, I think, techniques of how people are using this high-resolution imagery, 3D terrain, to study some of the issues of sustainability. There's an indigenous, oh, actually, here's one other thing I'll show you. There are climate refugees now because of rising sea levels. There's actually an island in Micronesia called Puluwat. I hope you're not getting dizzy from the flying. As you can kind of tell, this island is rather low in elevation. The community who lives there have noticed that they're going underwater. They need a new home. Believe it or not, they have used Google Earth to help find a new home. When they interviewed the elders to say, what should we look for? He said, someplace with a mountain. And so, again, very surprising, using Google Earth, they found a new home, and this is where they are now moving. It turns out it has the same breadfruit, it has the same type of climate and so on that will sustain them. Yeah. So there's a rising movement for payment for ecosystem services, including compensating local communities for being good stewards of the resources in their, under their jurisdiction. There's a project we've been doing with an indigenous tribe on carbon in their forest, and I'd like to show you that now. Many people are familiar with Google Earth, and environmental groups are using it today to take people all around the world virtually, places on the planet that are under threat. The Surui tribe is also using Google Earth as a tool based on the training the Google Earth Outreach team did in 2008 when we went down to the Surui territory in the Amazon. We taught them how to put their cultural map information on Google Earth
and share their culture with the world.
Para nossa visão indígena, floresta é uma das papel que pode trazer a clima normal. Estamos trabalhando com o projeto Carbono Suruí, né? Então, oferecer ao mercado o serviço que a floresta tem para diminuir o gás de estufa.
The Sui Red Carbon Project is one of the most advanced, or is the most advanced in the Amazon today. We're inserting Android handheld devices or telephones into the data collection process for carbon measurement. Because if you're saying you're going to reduce deforestation and in that way reduce carbon emissions into the atmosphere, you need to be able to measure or show how much carbon you're really preventing from going into the atmosphere.
Para medir uma árvore, você tem que tamanho de árvore que está sendo calculado, o carbono lá, né? Então, você vai seguindo o formulário que está dentro desse equipamento.
They're using Google Android
It's
smartphones.
a project really where the Indians themselves are the ones measuring the carbon and being taught how to do it, and they're using this technology. And so the technology allows them to become the carbon monitors.
Como tecnologia, como equipamento do Google, pode ser importante para construir um futuro melhor, um futuro que tenha consciência. Como é que as pessoas estão construindo solução para aqueles, mas isoladamente, mas precisamos juntar, né? Precisamos pensar o mundo como fosse nosso, todo mundo, que é, né?
And what's important now is to use the power of the internet to bring together all the voices that can participate in a dialogue towards constructive solutions for the planet. That's what we're building with Petition, and we're putting it in the hands of the world. It's going to be a great adventure.
So I'm going to just do a few more things. That was about geovisualization. When you have massive amounts of imagery for the planet, data for the planet, how can it support decision-making and better understanding with visualization? The last section is I'd like to talk about, and this really involves our work with Yale to a significant degree, a new technology our team has developed called Google Earth Engine for global scale environmental monitoring. And it came from the realization that the Earth is not static, as many of you know. It's actually changing dramatically. Deforestation, climate change resulting in many changes on the Earth's surface. These can be monitored from space, but it's a tremendous amount of data. But scientists came to us and asked us if we would help them. In particular, the first use case was forest monitoring, global forest monitoring, deforestation monitoring in particular, because it's a serious problem causing a tremendous amount of greenhouse gas emission. There's actually a protocol called RED under consideration for an international climate treaty. It's a massive amount of data, kind of a Google scale problem, and there was no existing solution for global forest monitoring, and a number of institutions came to us asking for us to contribute. So some of the challenges that we learned about are that the amount of data involved with doing, for example, remote monitoring of parts of the Amazon can be petabytes of data. The algorithms that are involved, the science exists to do analysis of this environmental data, but it hasn't been applied at scale. It's often locked up in fine institutions and ivory towers. It doesn't get into as broad operational use as it can. And then once you have the data and the types of science that can extract meaningful information from that environmental data, you need massive computing in order to handle other than small regions. And that's where cloud computing can play a role. So when people came to us with this request, we don't just want to look at the data in Google Earth Maps, we want to do analysis on it. We thought, well, it's very much within Google's mission to do this sort of thing. So here are some of the points, but basically, we wanted to help turbocharge science, right, and bring environmental monitoring to a much broader scale. We built the first version of Google Earth Engine which you can think of as a platform that has, unlike Google Earth and Maps, which are more static, Google Earth Engine has a daily feed of imagery coming in from a variety of sources with lots and lots of computers. And Google's data centers, they're all doing YouTube. They should be doing environmental monitoring, in my humble opinion. And then giving an interface to scientists, well, YouTube's okay, a little YouTube's okay. Anyway, to scientists who can put their methodologies on the platform. So this is probably obvious to many of you who work with so-called satellite remote sensing data, but there's a huge treasure trove of images and other scientific measurements that are being collected from space going back more than 40 years. There's been tremendous systematic observation of the Earth's surface, but that data has been typically on tape in government archives. It has not been online and available for scientific analysis. What we've done with Google Earth Engine, we've started with the Landsat catalog, which is the longest continuous observing mission, and brought essentially all of that historic catalog online into Google Earth Engine and made it available to scientists for doing analysis. When you have all that data and it goes back in time, and you have the ability with Earth Engine to do things like remove clouds, remove gaps, create a seamless picture of a planet over a year, you can make things like what you're going to see next. This is Las Vegas over the past 25 years. It's an animation, it's playing, it's going to play 4 times. But what you can see is the growth of Las Vegas over the last 25 years and the concurrent changes in Lake Mead. That animation is not live, but it will be soon. And then I wanted to focus on the kind of applications that our science partners are building. I'm going to focus on forest. You're going to hear from other Yale panelists on some of the other really exciting areas that they're working in. ClassLight is an annual deforestation forest degradation package that by Greg Asner of the Carnegie Institute for Science. We're working with the Brazilian institution Amazon. They were the one who originally approached us and said, we're trying to monitor the Amazon, but every month and issue a bulletin of what has happened that month. But by the time we finish processing the data, weeks have gone by, it's too late, the illegal loggers have moved on to another place. Well, we've now brought their algorithm into Earth Engine as of last June. This is the June bulletin for the Brazilian Amazon. Earth Engine is now systematically monitoring the Brazilian Amazon, and this is an example of the kind of bulletin they issue. And I'm just highlighting their comment in there was that with running this on Earth Engine now, it will reduce the time for processing of analysis and dissemination of data and reach half the time that it used to take, which they translated literally into hectares of forest that will be saved, because instead of issuing the report at the end of the next month, they can issue it just a few days after the close of each month, and they can actually intervene meaningfully in the activities that are causing that deforestation. And now that is being actually transferred to other countries. Closer to home, we're losing forest in Colorado. I'm working with Matt Hansen. Actually, Al Gore came to us and he said, this Earth Engine thing of yours, can you apply it to Colorado? So, working with Matt Hansen, we did. And this is showing pine beetle damage and fire damage in Colorado. We are all about having all of this be accessible and ubiquitous. And so here is the lead red negotiator for the government of Mexico running a forest analysis on his iPad. The last point I wanted to make about the platform is the reason we can do this global scale analysis efficiently is we take advantage of parallel computing. We take the area you want to analyze, which could be all of Mexico or the whole world, we split it up into pieces. We farm each piece out to a different computer in our data centers. Each one does its part of the analysis, and then we stitch it all back together automatically. This is all part of the magic of Earth Engine that any scientific algorithm can take advantage of. An example of what we did with that is to produce the finest scale map of forest in Mexico. It was 53,000 Landsat scenes, 18 terabytes of data. It would have, it was 15,000 hours of computation, which you ran on a single computer, would have taken almost 3 years. Maybe that's why no one has ever tried to do it before. But because we ran it on 1,000 computers in parallel, we had the result in less than a day. So it sounds like I'm bragging, maybe I am, but the point is that you can ask really different scale of questions now with this platform. There are things this platform would not be useful for, that existing platforms are fine for, but these really big questions that are global, we are now at your service. One last example is the Society for Conservation Biology and the European Parliament are developing policy around roadless areas, because it's been established that when roads go into a previously pristine area, various kinds of degradation of the natural ecosystem follow. And so they want to create policy, but to do that, you have to know where roadless areas are. So they approached us, and they said, you have road data, you have Earth Engine, could you create the world's first roadless area map? So we did that. Here's an example over, I guess I seem to like Australia today. Here's the Google Maps road data for Australia. You can literally see Perth and Adelaide and Sydney and so on. We brought that into Google Earth Engine, and we put a buffer of 5 or 10 kilometers from each road, and you end up now with this, which gives you what areas are roadless. You can see the outback. Here is the first prototype global roadless area map, and now this was presented at the Rio Plus 20 International Conference on Sustainability, and now we're working to iterate on this to make it truly an instrument of policy. So I'll just close, and I probably took too long, I'm sorry. But where we're going, those algorithms that were running in Brazil and so on, they're now being scaled up. We're working with World Resources Institute and other partners to build the world's first global forest monitoring system that would be put in the hands of nonprofits, academia, businesses who are trying to be more sustainable in their sourcing of commodities. Basically, everyone would have access to this living, breathing, daily picture of the world's forests. And with that, I will stop and just say I'm really excited about the work that Karen and Walter and others are doing here at Yale, and hoping that Earth Engine will help you guys. Thank you. All right. Let me, I'll just bring up.
So now we're going to bring up Walter Jetz, and I was remiss in thanking the conference was also sponsored by the Program in Spatial Biodiversity, Science, and Conservation, so YCCI and the SBSC. So thank you, Walter.
Thanks a lot, and I'm a faculty here in ecology and evolutionary biology, the old building just next door, and we work on biodiversity questions, are involved in that center that you just mentioned. There's quite a bit of biodiversity research going on here at Yale, and I think this follows nicely up on Rebecca's talk. We are losing biodiversity every day. We're losing it locally, as forests disappear, or as climate changes here and there, but we also lose it sometimes globally. We start to lose species globally. You know all about many famous examples of global extinctions, well, local extinctions sometimes can be reverted if we bring the species back into place. It's actually often the global extinctions we should be really worried about, because we may be losing the opportunity to use a species for health benefits or for quality of life benefits. We may lose a beautiful species to look at for next generations for forever. It'll take 100 million years for that, something like that, to come back. Now, these changes to biodiversity, these impacts, they all have they're explicitly spatial, right? They all have a spatial component. Only if you know how impacts such as deforestation and the occurrence, the distribution of biodiversity coincide, are you actually able to understand what's going on? Are you able to translate any of these environmental changes into consequences for biodiversity and the resulting consequences in terms of ecosystem services or direct services for humans into anything tangible? So only then can you actually get active. Now, it is absolutely fascinating to see the wealth of environmental information, and now thanks to tools like Google Earth Engine, of information about the change in sort of meter scale and day resolution almost. Now I think with this big environmental data, big data in environment, big data, global big data, we are really challenged now to see how can we use that wealth of information and use it for biodiversity conservation and for understanding the impacts, where they occur, and what we could do about them. So here I'm going to just demo for a few minutes something that we've been working on for the last a few years, thanks to funding from NSF and very dedicated support from the Google Earth Engine team over in California, and also a small grant we received from them. We are super privileged to have been able to work with them, and we got some really great people on this team. This is work also with Rob Goralnik at the University of Colorado Boulder. And what this tool does currently, mappinglife.org, a map of life is the name of the project. It allows you to look at species distributions worldwide. So unfortunately, we are by far not as advanced in our biodiversity information as we are in environmental information. For many species, the sort of detail of knowledge we have is very limited. And I'm just going to throw up a species here that I'm going to show you more about later. And I hope it's all going to work as intended. So here for that species, the Ruwenzori turaco, that's the sort of information we have about its global occurrence. It's restricted to the Ruwenzori Mountains. And for that species, we don't have any other point or survey data mobilized. We only know, experts know it roughly occurs there. And something similar is the situation for many species. Now we can, and I'll come back to that species in just a moment. So we can grab a different species, say, one of my favorite species, the Van der Deckens hornbill, where we have much more data sets available. And again, we are in East Africa here, and it's my favorite species because Catherine, who's sitting in the audience there, is doing her PhD on that species and others. And we are actually radio tracking that bird in the wild and adding all sorts of information. But here we have a greater wealth of information. There's some survey data for Kenya, these grid cells here, and then we have point data from other sources, and then various range maps. So that's a little better. Now I could show you thousands of maps. There are about 30,000 species in there right now that usually look more like that first species that I showed you. And for some others, we have thousands and thousands of points, and it gets very busy. Now that's all fun and exciting, and we can now start to use this information and integrate it with other pieces for inference. But first of all, this is also an educational tool. It really shows you the where of biodiversity worldwide. And there is something else I want to show you just real quick. We can actually use this information and for, say, a whole group of birds. Well, let's switch to another group here for a whole group of amphibians. Sorry, that was fish or reptiles. Let's do amphibians query. So this is a project now that puts at your fingertips species lists worldwide. We can go here into South America and query any location. Sorry, still with reptiles here. For the sort of species that occur there. So 110 species. So it's this sort of tool, it's a geotechy tool that really goes through these thousands of maps that we have in there and brings back information about the species that may occur there. And then we can click on these links here and learn more about the species. So it's really a biodiversity discovery tool. What can I find here? What species are here? Type information. And we can look at the images. We can understand which species are threatened, or we can download that list. And for birds, this gets much richer. We can go back to East Africa, where we were earlier, and do biodiversity discovery there. For example, in the Ruwenzori Mountains. And if I'm clicking the right spot here, we should get into our list. So there are about 670 species recorded for that location. So if you're a vacationer wanting to go there, want the species list up front, you can get it from here. Or if you're a teacher teaching a high school there, and you have good internet access, you can actually use this tool to do biodiversity discovery with your students. And here we got a bunch of turacos sitting here, and we can follow up on these images. But let's leave that layout. This is kind of where we are right now, and I encourage you to play around with this. But now the more techie stuff here. So I'm here have called up again that species from earlier. Actually, let's get rid of that for now. And this is now using Google Earth technology. And this is still a prototype, so anything can happen now. But I'm really thrilled to be able to show this to you. This is really thanks to Rebecca and Dave Tao in particular. And the lead programmer who's just been shouting some instructions from back there, Jeremy Malchik. Here again, that's that map, right? And it's kind of cool, we got that, right? But it's also a bit disappointing because I actually even know about that species. This is a high elevation specialist. And it's all turacos are forest specialists. And we know that sort of information for thousands of species, for 20,000 species, 30,000 species. We can say very clear things about what sort of habitat they live in. And suddenly we can actually, hang on a second, didn't Rebecca say something about forest mapping in 1 kilometer resolution, or even better? What about these digital elevation models that you've seen? So why don't we join this all up? Well, we haven't been able to because we didn't have the computing resources. Or we could do that on our own laptop or desktop computer after we waited for a while, do it for one species, make it happen. Now here, fingers crossed, thanks to Google Earth technology, we are able to do this on the fly. So here we have, for that species, pre-selected the fact that it is restricted to forests. We've got forest selected here, and we have entered its elevation range already. We can click apply this habitat modification, and there we go. We get actually two things, and let me just change the background here so you see that a little better. We get two things. First of all, we get a much more detailed picture of the species' actual distribution. Yeah? And this is calculated at ultimately 90 meter or a kilometer resolution. And with it, we get now an updated estimate of its global geographic range size. And suddenly we are going from about 100,000 kilometers earlier, this big blob, you remember, to something that's much closer to the actual potential range for that species. And that's less than 10% of that other range that we talked about earlier. Yeah? So suddenly we have this at our fingertips. And it's transparent. Everybody can play with that. And you can change these settings here and include other habitats or change the elevation range, and you would get different results. So experts can engage with that and use that for predictions. And you can repeat that for thousands of species. You can intersect that with reserves to get to a much more probabilistic, quantitative, ultimately 1 kilometer resolution understanding of species occurrence, species presence in reserves and their potential protection status. And you can repeat this for different years of MODIS data. So this is using MODIS data that some of you may have heard about, which is really good about capturing land cover types. And you can repeat this for different years. And one other thing we're starting to work on now is a tool that would allow you to assess potential changes. And in some parts of the world, you would really see how this potential habitat for that species has changed over the last 10 years. And that could really help inform conservation prioritization and land management. And it will ultimately also facilitate a species list tool that I showed you earlier that will offer much greater detail, where land managers really can go in and draw a very detailed potential place for extraction and get an understanding of the potential species occurring there. So with that, I'd like to leave it, but just sort of give you a taste here of the sort of things that are becoming possible thanks to these big data geotechnology tools and thanks to Google Earth Engine. And with that, pass over to Karen. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Karen Seto. I'm a professor here in the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. The presentations are going to get increasingly less high-tech. I'm a geographer and a remote sensing scientist, and despite that, I knew not to follow Rebecca Moore with any animations or any satellite data because you would be greatly underwhelmed. The title of today's session is Geotechnology and the Future of Sustainability, but I decided to flip that around a little bit. I was asked, my understanding of the panel was that we were going to talk about our visions for geotechnology and sustainability. And it's been about 21 years since I first did my first analysis on remote sensing and did GIS. And the field has come a really, really long way. I looked over at Dana Tomlin because I read some of his books as a doctoral student. The field has come a really, really long way, but I think that we still have a really long way to go, especially if we're really thinking about planetary sustainability. I'm going to keep my remarks relatively short, but what I want to do is give some ideas for where I think the future of geotechnology can go and needs to go in order to address some of the most pressing environmental and sustainability challenges at the planetary scale. I'm going to start off with these two publications, these two studies that were commissioned by the National Research Council. The one on the left, Understanding the Changing Planet, was published in 2010, and I had the pleasure of serving on that committee. The one on the right was published just last year, called Computing Research for Sustainability. And if we take a look at the key messages in both of these reports, I think we see a few themes, common themes that are really reflected in today's panel and certainly in some of the comments that Rebecca discussed. First, I want to just highlight a few of the key questions that the National Research Committee or National Research Council Committee on Our Changing Planet identified as what are some of the key challenges for sustainability. And I want to highlight a few of these. So the first big challenge was, how are we changing the physical environment of the Earth's surface? Number two was, how can we preserve or best preserve biological diversity and protect endangered species? How and where will 10 billion people live on Earth? How will we sustainably feed everyone in the coming decade and beyond? How is the movement of people, goods, and ideas transforming the world? And how might we better observe, analyze, and visualize a changing world? So these were some of the questions that the committee identified as grand challenges for sustainability in the geographical sciences. So how can geography, how can geospatial tools, how can geotechnology help answer these grand challenges? My research is on urbanization, and so of course I see those earlier questions from the lens of how urbanization is transforming the planet. And here I think that we are really at a unique time in history in that we're living in a time where we are seeing unprecedented global changes in terms of the scale of these changes, in terms of the rate of these changes, but we're also living in this unprecedented time of large-scale technology and geotechnology, lots of data. And I think one of the big opportunities moving forward in the next 10 and 20 years is how can we use these technologies and these data to help answer fundamental questions about not only how we're changing the planet, which is, I think, much about characterizing visualizations, but more towards understanding why these changes are happening and what we can do to actually obviate some of these changes. So you can see in this slide that urbanization is linked to a lot of the previous challenges that I showed in the slide, whether it's about agricultural land loss and the ability to feed 10 billion people, or simply the fact that urbanization takes up land and fragments habitats and leads to biodiversity loss. If we look at the second NRC publication that I showed in one of my first slides, the computing challenges, this in many ways really summarizes the take-home messages from that report. And the vision of that committee was that advances in computing would allow us to make trade-offs, understand complex systems and their linkages in order to account for uncertainty. And I think this issue of accounting for uncertainty and making linkages is one of the areas that we haven't done so well in geotechnology so far. Certainly not in geography, not at the global scale. We do it for small images, one image at a time, but I think that's certainly one of the key challenges moving forward, is moving beyond visualization, moving beyond characterization to understand what are the trade-offs behind some of the decisions that we make, and how do they manifest themselves on the planet. Again, so my research is on urbanization, so I see everything in terms of, from the lens of urban growth and urbanization. In 1800, the planet's population, only 3% of them lived in urban areas. By the end of this century, almost 90% of the global planet's population will live in urban areas. So the most recent estimates from the UN suggest that we're going to be living on a planet of about 10 billion people. So we're talking about roughly 9 billion people living in urban areas. And I think a really fundamental question is how this transition will change the planet, whether it's biodiversity, whether it's how do we feed people, where these people live, how they live, will truly fundamentally change sustainability, our concepts of sustainability and prospects for sustainability. And I think that's where future geotechnology, or the future of geotechnology, can really go. Help us understand why certain patterns emerge, as well as understand the impacts of those changes. There is one little slide that shows some of the work that we've done in my lab, where we have forecasted probabilities of urban growth globally going to 2030. And here in this slide, areas that are red indicate high likelihood of becoming urban by 2030. Areas that are yellow indicate low probability, but still positive probability, positive likelihood it might become urban. And the take-home message from this analysis that we did, that was published last year, is that there's a tremendous opportunity to shape urban environments. There's a lot of opportunity to shape how cities will become, but we actually don't understand how decisions at the local level, at the city level, at the plot level, at the household level, interact with policies at local, national, and international levels. Rebecca talked about the RED protocol. You know, how will RED impact the prices for timber and other raw materials? And how will that actually impact where people decide to live and the types of houses that they live in? And I think it's these really complex linkages that geotechnology, and the future of geotechnology, hopefully can help us understand. I'm going to end with this slide that is my vision for where I hope geotechnology will go in terms of helping us understand or come up with some solutions towards sustainability. I think we have to move away from characterizing the what. That's the visualization that you see with satellite data, with other types of geospatial data. I think we have to move more into running scenarios and forecasting where and when types of changes will occur, what types of changes will occur across multiple scales. And I think here, some of the work that Rebecca and her team are doing is really revolutionary, because we're able to look beyond just a city or even a country, but really look at the planetary scale. I think that at the end of the day, if geotechnology does not help us understand the linkages or the underlying process behind the patterns that we see, then we will have failed. Because ultimately, the patterns that we see with satellite data, with other types of aerial photographs, any kind of remote sensing data, there are underlying process that create those patterns. And if we want certain types of patterns to emerge, whether it's saving certain types of species or having certain parts of the world that are roadless or whatever it may be, we need to have a better understanding of why existing patterns have emerged and making these linkages across scales. So I think we really need to move into an era of understanding the whys and the hows and really moving away from the era of what. And ultimately, I think what we need to do better as a community is more integration and coupling across disciplines. For decades, remote sensing science was really, I would say, locked in a small community of people like me, pixel pushers, people who like to think about algorithms and all sorts of geeky stuff like that. And I think one of the exciting things about Google Earth and what Google has done is really revolutionized how we think about and get access to satellite data. And I think that what we need to do now in this next era is link the people on the ground who might have local knowledge with scientists or with policymakers from different disciplines to really think about much more comprehensive solutions. So I'll end my comments like that. Thank you for listening. And with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dana Tomlin, who, for those of you who do not know, is really one of the fathers of GIS. And I just have to say that it's a great pleasure to have him on the panel with us today. Thank you.
To the best of my knowledge, I'm the father of only one son. And come back to that momentarily. As I was coming to New Haven this morning, I took a route that was a bit different from the one I normally take. It brought me in front of the Peabody down Whitney Avenue, and it was the first opportunity I had had for, I realized, probably a couple of months now, to see the new SOM building, the glass tower over there. And as I turned the corner, turned right, there was a fellow with his daughter, I would say about 4 years old, and I wish you could have seen the look in her eyes as she looked across the street at the glass tower. And it was at that moment I knew exactly what I was going to talk about this afternoon. I only have a few moments, and so I'll start, of course, by talking about myself, spend a little bit of time talking about those around me, and if enough time remains, then perhaps saying something about you. What I want to talk about is the twinkle in her eye and the twinkles in some other eyes that I've seen yesterday and today. For me, the comparable twinkle was, I think, perhaps as an undergrad, when I was challenged by one of my professors the whole class was challenged to take a week and go learn some computer programming. This was using BASIC, believe it or not, it was with paper tape to store the programs. And I wrote a program that played tic-tac-toe. Looking back, I like to think of this as a 3x3 raster of pixels. But it truly engaged me when this program, when it got caught, it cheated. It took the move that had already been, and it replaced the O with the X. And when it did that, and I say that deliberately, when it did that, I knew that I was on my career path. A few years later, this was in the early 70s, I found myself in a situation where the twinkles in the eyes were in those of my professors, one of whom would later go on to be associated with a little company called Keyhole. Another was, actually two of my classmates went on and founded a little company called Erdos. And at that time, there was this kid who had graduated 4 years before us. His name was Jack something or another. I don't quite remember, but had something to do with Redlands, California, I believe. Anyway, it was another professor at that time who, when working on a deer habitat assessment model came up to me and said, surely you can get your computer to see those long and stringy forest areas from those short and blobby areas. And that was just what I needed, just what we needed to say, you bet we can get the computer to see those spatial patterns. It wasn't too many years later when up in Greeley, I can remember making a presentation that again involved deer habitat. In this case, up at Yale Myers, the grid had grown from a 3x3. This was all of 25 rows by 25 columns to grid off the Yale Myers area, the one that many of you still know as the old yellow paper maps. And I put together indeed a deer habitat model, presented it to the class. And you may think I'm joking, but I'm not when I tell you that my professor started chuckling. I still feel that. Talk about motivation. It took me all of 10 or 15 seconds to believe that, yeah, I'm going to show you. We're live, right? So that was in the, let's say toward the late 80s. The feeling at that time, the feeling of prospect, the feeling that we could do something that was, the feeling of power was largely motivated by at that time, this is late 70s, the opportunity to stop visiting YCC, to stop visiting the Yale Computer Center, and as 1980 approached, to begin doing what we were doing on the desktop. And you can imagine with the PC and the Mac, I'll say again, that feeling of power was just palpable. Toward the mid-'80s, I can remember another twinkle in the eye. This was when doing some work with a Canadian GIS firm. And I remember driving down a road in Montreal, and this fellow said, the president of the company said, you know what I want to do? Seriously, I want to map the world. This is 1985. He said, I want to get aerial photo coverage of the entire world. And within 2 seconds of that statement, he was driving, I was riding, we crashed. Never spoke of it again. Had an automobile accident. In 1990, some of my students have heard me refer to the 10-10-10 machine. Talk about excitement. This was to be a GPS device that was to have accuracy less than 10 meters. It was to weigh, a GPS, to weigh less than 10 pounds. And in 1990, it was to cost less than $10,000. And that was really exciting. It was at that time, too, that I got my first laptop. It was a MacBook, and I have it here. It weighs about 25 pounds, I think. It's black and white, and when I say black and white, I don't mean grayscale. It was black or white. But talk about excitement. I remember about that time as well doing some work with another fellow from ESRI, and I remember it distinctly because he lived on a boat off Seattle, and late one night he said, listen, this is what we want to do. We want GIS on the back of an envelope. Let me show you. I've got this new software package. It's called SketchUp. Well, look where SketchUp is today. Look where we are today. In the mid-'90s, 93, 94, the excitement came from something that will be meaningful to not many, but I think some of you, a package called Mosaic. I won't say any more about it. Google it if you want to find out about Mosaic. In 2000, what was it? Well, it was the move from the desktop perhaps to web services. In 2005, certainly Google Earth, mobile devices. But what is it today? Well, I can tell you that from my perspective, it's two things. One is the opportunity to really go mapless. What I want to do is to be able to walk outside, not have to bring more reality into the lab, but to bring more of the lab out into the real world. And I not only want to be able to sense what's around me, I want to be able to look over there and see 1850 I want to look over there and know something about the radon. I want to be able to walk down the road and feel the crime statistics. And not only do I want to be able to receive these things, I want to be able to make gestures. I want to be able to put that Walmart over there. And as I do that, I want the landscape to react. And I don't mean react just by putting a swatch of red on a piece of paper. I want those trees to squeal. I want a wristband on my hand that gets tighter and tighter the more I screw up the environment. I want to take advantage of those same tactile, visceral capabilities that are otherwise applied in video games. I just got seriously, I just got a text message from my wife as Karen was talking. It's about my son. My son is a 22-year-old, not unlike some of my other kids around here. He's in a very competitive filmmaking program. His name's Matt. Matt just called. Screening went over the top. Phenomenally great. Very happy. Professor said, best in 3 years, has to become a feature. That has nothing to do with my talk. I just thought I'd share that with you. Actually, it has everything to do with my talk, because this afternoon I've had the opportunity to see some of my other kids about whom I know I'm going to be just as proud well, I already am, but just as proud in several months. Google came here over the past couple of days and did indeed knock our socks off. And I tell you, we truly plan to reciprocate. Thanks.
That was wonderful. I'd like to invite all the panelists to join us on stage, and then in the interest of time, I think we'll begin a bit of Q&A from the audience. So can those, and we are live, so everyone, if you could raise your hand, one of the students will bring a mic to you for questions. And you, of course, can ask questions of each other if no one fires away.
Okay.
So I'd like to ask maybe each panelist, as we're thinking and considering, what the future is in big, broad brushstrokes. Let's just consider, what is the rate of change here that we're thinking about? What might we be able to accomplish in, 1 year or 5 years or 10 years? And, in any of the domains that you've mentioned, but I'd just like to think a little bit about, how fast are things moving today?
Rebecca, or what
All right,
technology will there be?
How fast is technology moving? How can I put a number on that? Yeah, I think we're seeing kind of not sort of linear evolution, but I honestly think with the cloud, the advent of the cloud, and it's not just Google's cloud, there are other clouds out there too, it's been a really step function in what's possible, and I think people haven't even completely yet grokked how they can use that to tackle those bigger problems. So I think there's going to be this period of growing into what's now you can ask and answer. That's going to be very exciting, for us to help participate in. And then, of course, mobile technology, the integration of obviously there's GPS in mobile technology, and it's Wireless is going more and more, and internet more and more in the developing world. So I think there are more and more places you're going to see where you can get real life, real live data from the field that can be used to inform what's happening in the cloud in terms of analyzing, calibrating, validating, and all of that. Just a couple thoughts.
So I'm going to turn that question around a little bit.
I wish I'd done that.
So I agree. I mean, clearly the technology is moving very fast. We are getting, I don't even know how much data, whether it's from NASA's assets, NOAA, Japan has a number of satellites. I mean, that's the new mission to Mars, is to launch your own Earth observing satellite. So there are lots of data coming on board. I think the real lag is actually transforming data, raw data, spectral signatures, into information. And then the bigger lag is changing from information to some knowledge and changes in decision. I mean, we have now, again, Rebecca had the number, I don't remember, lots of data. I mean, clearly lots of information and lots of data. Some of it's being translated into information, but we still, that information is not making us make better decisions, I would say, at the global, certainly not at the planetary scale. And here I am hoping, just to follow up on something that Dana said, that this new generation of folks in this room, people who are using Google Earth, I think that will hopefully change that time, but I don't see any parallel rate of change in terms of data versus knowledge.
Well, I would add that I agree with that bottleneck. That's ultimately the brains to think about it smart, and it's thanks to events like these here that this workshop that the brains get empowered with the skills, and ultimately, hopefully, down the road there will be that bottleneck will be smaller than we think. I'm certainly excited though about in terms of technology, and my eyes got opened over the last few years that I actually from now see this going gradually. I mean, we are looking at 30-meter resolution global analyses. So not just data coming in, but also the ability to actually make sense of that data up to a point, right? And then more brain is required. But technologically, deal with it. Why not in 3 years, 1 meter, 2 meter resolution data? Why not potentially even finer down the road? So perhaps we'll look back and think about some sort of Moore's law of the ability to work with finer and finer grain temporally and spatial data. And I think that's what we should think about, work with 1 meter data in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But then at some point we actually will not just run out of brains to do really smart things with this, but also we'll run out of sensors, actually. That's thinking ahead, thinking 5 years ahead. Actually, the computational limits may not be so severe anymore. It may actually be the fact that there aren't any. It takes 5 years for a new satellite to even make it up there and bring good data, or 10 years, even longer the implementation, and sort of feel my eyes opened about the opportunities and the computational opportunities, but then there will be other things that will actually be lacking in some time down the road. Dana, did you want to, or Rebecca?
I'd prefer not to answer that question. I would prefer to mirror it back as well and ask you, what are you going to do with this technology? And in that regard, I would only echo the comments of another Google Geo sort of guy, Michael Jones, who a few weeks ago when I mused with him about some ideas, he said, "Don't come to me with such small problems." And I would say the same thing to you.
Just to, off of what you said, Karen, but there's a lot of data that's being collected that's not only not being turned into knowledge, but people are not even looking at it at all. There's just massive pixels coming in that nothing is extracted from them at all. And I think part of the reason is it's been so hard to do that. It takes a long time to do that. And sometimes by the time you do it, the information is stale, right? And so what I'm excited about is this idea that we could really actually have a living, breathing model of the planet that is getting refreshed every minute, you know, with this data that's coming in, and the data is accessible for all kinds of meaningful information extraction. And for example, a lot of these satellites are taskable. And certain areas on the planet are changing faster than others, or are under greater threat and deserve a higher level of monitoring. But that's not happening. So what if you could have this kind of more adaptive system where, you know, information comes in that indicates at coarse resolution that there seems to be something going on here. We don't quite know what it is. You task a satellite that does a finer level pass over that and gets more information, right? This kind of thing could exist, but to my knowledge, it doesn't exist today.
So I agree with my colleague Walter about, you know, getting more finer spatial data, but I would also caution the urge to move towards finer spatial data and thinking that if we had just better data, we would be able to ask better questions and develop better answers and do better analyses, because I think that's something that I've certainly seen in the NASA community for a long time, that, well, we had 6-bit data and it was 79-meter resolution. So 6-bit data means that you don't get a lot of radiometric information out of it. And the temporal resolution was very low. You know, maybe the satellite's only passing every 28 days. So now we're getting satellites where we're observing, you know, the same image is taken every single day. We've got, oh my goodness, we've got now not only 8-bit data, which is what I used a lot, we've got 12, we've got 16-bit data. So you've got thousands of different possible combinations for each pixel across multiple spectral bands. We're dealing with much finer spectral resolution now. So it used to be that a spectral band was very wide, and so you might get one band for the near infrared, but now you're getting really, really fine bands of information over really small intervals of the electromagnetic spectrum. And the question that I have is, yes, we can store it, we can, you know, we're in an era where Google can house it and compute it, but are we asking the fundamental questions that will help us understand how the planet is changing and how we can actually change decisions to move towards, transition towards sustainability? So I just, you know, I'm thinking especially that, you know, there are now 1-meter, sub-meter resolution data, and I don't see the science moving significantly ahead in terms of the kinds of questions that we can ask. We can definitely see the world in a much more crisper and all of that, but what have we learned about, again, planetary scale types of questions? At the local scale, I think that's where the spatial resolution really buys us, I mean, I think the examples that Rebecca showed us clearly show that the spatial resolution buys you a lot there. But I think we should remember when we deal with satellite data, there are a number of other resolutions: the temporal resolution, the radiometric resolution, the spectral resolution. And on those fronts, we've also gained, you know, a lot more information, but we need to also move ahead in terms of the types of questions that we ask.
So how do we do that?
She's going to do it right there.
Okay, good. Glad somebody is.
Hi, I'm not a student, but I live in Hamden, Connecticut. Thanks to Yale for opening this up to the public. But as I think about it, having spent many years in corporate doing strategic planning, we look at long-term, short-term, these kinds of data or questions we've never really asked ourselves. And as I was reflecting on the information presented here, it's how do we make it more accessible to whether it's the average person in Hamden, Connecticut, or policymakers, so that they understand that there needs to be action from this, and from corporate executives who have, I think practically everyone has a sustainability officer today, but what does that really mean? I'm impressed, but I'm thinking, how do you translate this so that it's accessible and it leaves academia and moves into a more usable setting? I'm not saying this is not useful, but I'm having difficulty making that connection. Would love your thoughts.
Well, I mean, projects like the one I showed at the very end, the Global Forest Watch, that's kind of the idea of that project, is to take all the best scientists. There's some scientists are really good at, monitoring deforestation in the Amazon, and others are good in Indonesia, and some are good in, whatever, and kind of get all of that and put it under the covers of a very accessible, easy to understand and interact with system where anyone can go, kind of like I think your biodiversity system. Anyone can go and go somewhere and see what's going on in that place and see trends and see maybe policy that's been associated with that. Where are there legal logging concessions? I don't even know all the details, but the idea is it would be very, very accessible. Is that at all the kind of thing you're talking about?
I just think that I'm just not sure who, beyond an environmental studies program expert, who knows of this, who's aware, because I think I would have proposed different possibilities as a strategist, for example. And I'm not sure how many of my counterparts are even aware of that, of this type of information, how it impacts us globally, because we're doing global planning. And then within government, I went to a couple of sessions in Hartford recently, and they're talking about issues regarding aging and population growth and so on and so forth. Granted, it's just for the state of Connecticut, but I don't know if there might be information here that can help in that decision making. I'm not sure. You have municipalities making decisions on water treatments, and I just see a disconnect between what's being studied and it getting to the individuals who can make decisions and impact change.
So I think this is where what Rebecca and her team are doing really is revolutionizing that time between science and uptake. And I don't know if Rebecca mentioned it today, but what she showed earlier this afternoon is really some relatively new technology. And I think that probably a year from now, had you heard of Google Earth before? Had you used Google Earth? Okay, so you'd heard of Google Earth. I would imagine in a year or so's time, you will probably hear or know of people using the map engine or the Earth engine. I just want to explain. So Rebecca showed a very quick snapshot of work that she said was being done by a scientist named Greg Asner. Greg Asner is a former colleague of mine out in California, and he is one of the world's most renowned remote sensing scientists who flies his own planes, developed his own sensors to monitor the forests. And he and his team are developing pretty complex algorithms, a lot of pixel pushing, to identify deforestation. And for a long time, his algorithms were, again, understood by a small subset of remote sensing scientists who read these relatively geeky articles. Interesting for us, but probably not for, not dinner conversation you're going to have. And it's exciting to see that Google Earth Engine and Rebecca's team is really translating something that, again, one of the world's best remote sensing scientists in forest monitoring now is being used by a number of governments and translated into probably an app of some sort. Yeah. That is really revolutionary. If I could be so lucky that some of our algorithms get translated, that would be very revolutionary.
A year from now, right? Karen, a year from now, urban. Yep. We need urban in Earth Engine.
So I would say you can't expect a single website or a single project to sort of cover it all, right? But what's so cool here is that this is empowering in so many different directions. Yeah, anything to do with change analysis, with land cover assessment, with the list is endless. Yeah, but connected to stuff about the environment, and by making it freely accessible and putting it all at anyone's fingertips, you don't need a huge computer to do this stuff. I think that's really the huge contribution. And then projects can build up on that. We build up on it with biodiversity translated, I think, also in a way that then anybody can do something with and interpret, and other people can build yet on that. So it's going to cascade, and that's really, I think, the exciting bit here.
You opened your remarks by saying, I would why not say, I will? Look around yourself. I know most of the faces that are within reach of you right now. Talk to them. I'm not saying that each one of those students is likely to be interested in the precise concerns that you've described, but I bet those students know another student who is interested in the concerns that you described. You know, we talk about outreach. What an opportunity, both ways.
Some questions?
Hi, I'm Matt Long, second year student here. I'd like to say this is the most exciting thing I've seen in my year and a half here by far. It's really amazing, and I will get at your question as well. I'm going to work right to left, my right to left. So, Walter, I am using 1 meter data for a 45 square mile watershed. I have 121 million data points. I had a MacBook Pro with 8 gigs in it and just replaced it with 16, which Larry and the CEO told me yesterday has more RAM than their desktop computers there. So we are, with our increasing computing abilities, being able to work with finer and finer spatial scale data. Then on to Karen, you're right, like the spatial scale has nothing to do with the quality of the questions. In my case, I can see roads that I wasn't able to see before. So maybe you're also right that it matters more at a local scale than a global scale. Rebecca, it's awesome that we now have this computing ability way beyond the 16 gigs in my MacBook Pro. And I'm interested in utilizing Google Earth Engine. I'm not sure what kind of algorithms will be incorporated into it by the time I want to use it. Probably not the erosion model that I'm using currently, but the future's open.
Let's talk.
Okay. And Dana,
Please keep in mind that I'm really thin-skinned.
Okay. And Dana, I love your Dr. Seuss imagination that you've always brought to the table. And I would love to be able to swipe and see that Walmart, or have the wristband tighten on my wrist when I screw up and have too big of a carbon footprint. And you know, I don't think that's all that far-fetched. Maybe not today, but maybe not that far in the future.
With the Google glasses, you'll be able to do that.
Exactly.
I was thinking you should get the Google Glass.
And to answer your question, I've always thought, or at least I've thought for the last year and a half that I've been here, that maps are great because they can speak to people who don't speak English or Chinese or Spanish. You know, anyone can look at a map, and especially a 3D Google Earth-driven map. And PCs are not all that common, even in relatively rural areas now, but even a paper map, and you can convey information without having to speak the same language. And I think that's what really draws me to mapping. And now mapping is getting more and more capabilities to convey more and more problems or solutions. And so I think this is a really beautiful thing that's only going to expand in the near future.
Hey, back to erosion modeling, believe it or not. You thought you were going to get away with, just leaving it at that, but do you know the Schall-Stab algorithm? Anyway, we're working with the scientists to develop that, which is, I believe, in erosion modeling.
I know Heckgrass and SWAT and WEP, but I haven't heard of that one.
All right.
Hi, I'm Kara May. I'm a second year here. I'm going to thank the panelists for being here, such interesting information. My question is sort of the opposite of the last one that was asked from the woman behind me. And I apologize if this is an old question that's sort of already been answered, but I suspect it's still being grappled with. I wonder about privacy concerns, getting this information getting into the hands of people that we don't want it to, military concerns, et cetera. And I'll a step further than that. How are those concerns holding back the work that you're trying to do?
Good, please.
So I highly recommend you take a look at the Grand Challenges report that I mentioned at the very first slide, because one of the challenges that was identified by the committee was what are the privacy concerns of mapping citizens as well as citizen mapping, privacy concerns as well as accuracy issues. So there are actually several agencies within the federal government that are concerned about these issues. I won't go into detail, but that is something that's highlighted. There's a whole chapter on it, discusses it.
And I mean,
Yeah, please.
privacy concerns extend all the way to species, actually, in that really threatened species. And that question has actually come up with Map of Life a few times, right? If you're able to predict at 1 kilometer or 30 meter ultimately grain the probability of certain species interesting for trade or for exploitation occurring, you actually run into some serious problems, and you may be doing some bad. So this is definitely something that is increasingly on our mind, and there are ways to deal with it. So you black out species that are of such concern and only make it available to academics. But yeah, it's actually something that even in biodiversity science we have to think about.
So I don't know exactly what the gist of the question is because it's a big topic, privacy. But I know, for example, with Google Earth and Maps, things like Street View, we blur out personally identifiable information. But stepping back to a bigger question, I think sometimes governments raise certain issues that may be under the privacy banner or whatever, and it's in fact leading to a loss of transparency of their activities. So I think one of the benefits of having more access to information is there is just more transparency on what's going on by all the different actors. Donors are giving a tremendous amount of money now, donor nations like Norway, to governments to enact better policies and action on the ground for forest protection, but the money sort of disappears and no one knows where it's going, and it's not necessarily getting to the ground where the actions are really, the positive actions are needed to be done. So again, this is not totally related to privacy, but just there's a benefit to having more transparency in some things.
Hi, my name is Nick. I am an undergraduate here. And I wanted to actually start out with a question that was asked at the beginning, or at least an invitation, which was, or a hope that this would be open to high schoolers and junior high students as well, that we would find ways to sort of integrate mapping into the curriculum. I think that one of the interesting things I've noticed this weekend, or excuse me, Thursday and Friday, we're not there yet, is that I've only seen about 3 or 4 undergraduates here. And I think that's telling because, from my personal experience, GIS wasn't a word I heard until last year, and I've been sort of frenetically trying to, speed up on the learning curve since then. I wanted to ask, I think obviously, finding application for it in the wider world is great, but in terms of Yale, how do you find, like a strong base, especially in the college, of integrating GIS into a curriculum?
No, it's a very good question, and it's one we've actually already been talking about a little bit. Actually, we had a discussion. Not sure whether you were still around for that yesterday afternoon among a smaller group of geo-education and how to use tools like this or others for teaching. Now, I think there is something extremely empowering through tools like Google Earth Engine. If you can think about Google Maps or Google Earth. People are already using it. Teachers are already using it, already in high school level, and it's certainly at the undergraduate level. I'm teaching a conservation class here, and I've had folks use these simple tools, but they're only the very simplest. And if the more we make that easier, the more I think professors will be able to use these tools. There's been a large barrier of entry so far in that these tools, these offline tools, you have to take a course, and we have amazing facilities. So Stacy Maples is sitting there and is doing an amazing job here teaching undergrads, actually, a lot of students GIS, but it takes dedication to do that. And so I think we're looking at all sorts of new ways in which the access to GIS and these sort of things that we've seen earlier becomes easier. And this is one of the really promising ones. Karen, do you want to add to that from a...
Yeah, I mean, so before I came to Yale, I was at another school where there was no geography department. My PhD is in geography. And unfortunately, the US and many countries, geography, not in Asia and not in Europe, but in the US, certainly geography education K through 12 is going downhill. And there have been, there's another NRC study from about 10 years ago that examines the state of geographic education. And the advent of geotechnology and the uptake of geotechnology is kind of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, a lot of people are using things like Google Maps, Google Engine, Maps, MapQuest, or I don't even know if that's still around, but people are understanding the power of mapping. And the student back there mentioned how fun it is to map, and it was just made me very happy as a geographer. But at the same time, the double-edged sword is that people think that it's just a technology, and that there's an entire science behind the maps that you see. There's a lot of, there's a lot of math, there's a lot of computer science, there's actually a lot of cognitive sciences behind there as well, psychology, and it's what they do. When I say they, whether it's Google or Esri, these softwares that you're using actually has a lot of science behind it. And so I think that's the challenge that we run into today for a lot of universities is how do we, and I think this is a question for administrators, is how is GIS or remote sensing or geotechnology moved away from just being a technology? I mean, ironically, a few years ago I was on a panel that consisted of Ivy League schools and my former school in California, kind of all elite schools that didn't have a geography department anymore. We all had geography departments, but they were all abolished sometime between the 1940s and 1969. And yet all of these universities, Brown, Stanford, Michigan, I can't remember, Harvard, they all had a GIS guru like Stace that all the faculty said we could not do our jobs, we could not do our science without someone like that. And in fact, we need to employ a team of them, but also that we need to teach the students the science behind, let's say, uncertainty, and move beyond thinking about this as just a technology. So, I mean, I do think that it's a double-edged sword, but hopefully having more students being interested in this technology might also bring back some of the science behind it.
I have another answer. I want to seduce people into GIS. I mean, there's really spatial reasoning should be part of many disciplines, right? Whether it's public health, epidemiology, political science. I mean, these human activities take place on a physical planet, and there are realities about interactions, right, that happen in space. And so calling something, you have to study this thing called GIS, makes it kind of too onerous. And some of the things we're trying to do with the new tools that are coming out are sneak some lightweight GIS into very familiar interfaces like Google Maps, so that what's the distance from here to here, create a buffer around something, the intersection of this or that. There's really 3 or 4 or maybe 8 types of GIS operations that basically everyone can intuitively understand and have broad applicability. So that's kind of what we're excited about. Can we bring that level of spatial reasoning into very easy to use familiar tools and let people apply them broadly across many domains? Does that make sense?
One of the ironies, though, is because these technologies are so ubiquitous and so easy to use, there are a number of studies that show that we are not using our own spatial reasoning skills, right? How often do you think, well, how far is it to get from X to Y? Well, I don't know, let me map it. Well, you could probably figure it out. Or the one that I find interesting whenever I take students out into the field is they can't figure out where north, south, east, or west is. And so I say, well, here's my compass. I know it doesn't require any battery-operated thing, but it works. And actually, if you look at where the sun is, and relative to where we are now, it's remarkable. So, I mean, I think there are some dangers with relying too much on the technology as well.
No, there are no dangers.
So with that, we'll let this conversation continue into the night. And thank you so much. And this will wrap up our panel discussion, which culminates our 2 days of events here. We'd like to, on behalf of Yale, I'd like to thank Rebecca Moore and her team, an amazing team that's come
Can you guys
to us.
stand up?
Could everybody
Dave
stand
Sal,
up? Yep, and let's
Karen Tuxen
give them a
Beckman,
hand.
Tina, Ormda.
They've just been outstanding in co-hosting this event. We'd like to thank the Yale SPSC, the YCEI, the CBAY, and the Yale Center for Earth Observation for co-hosting this event. And we'd like to thank all of you for attending this and making this just a tremendously exciting event that will have ripples and reverberations for time to come.
Peter, we're not done yet. Walter.
Yeah, so this all probably wouldn't have happened at all, and certainly wouldn't have happened this smoothly if it hadn't been for Peter Christensen. He's a PhD student here at Yale, and Karen Seto's lab. Big.
I want to echo that. You know, we were here, I spoke a year ago, and talked for like 3 hours afterwards with Peter, and it was so exciting, and it's really, he's been driving the interaction between Google and Yale for the last year and really made this whole thing happen. So thank you for Google.
Okay, let's eat. Everybody join us at the reception.